Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Magruder, and I am the Executive Director of Community Hero Action Group. Our mission is closing the gaps in health and wealth disparities within the Black community. I am here with the last session of the day for the 2022 Black Health Matters Conference Disrupt and Build Up. I am pleased to present our last, but certainly not least, one of my most favorite panelists, and that is Dr. Sophia Shabazz, and she is going to tell us a lot about a topic that I know many of you are interested in, as this was one of our more popular sessions that we had. Fast to slow, examining the science of intermittent fasting. So you don't have to Google, you don't have to ask your friends, you actually have a subject matter expert here live. So feel free to drop any comments that you have in the chat, and we will go ahead and get started, and I will hand it over to you, Dr. Shabazz.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I am talking about one of my favorite topics, and the exciting thing about intermittent fasting is just how much the research has evolved in the last, say, 20 years. I remember giving a presentation about intermittent fasting when I was a resident, and the nutritionist, almost threw me out of the room because it was, just not really in line with the nutrition advice that most of us have been trained to give. So how do I know if everyone can see my slides? I'm going to assume that you're able to see my screen just fine. And we're again talking about fast to slow, using intermittent fasting to slow the aging process. Just a disclaimer, the information today is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If this is for general information purposes only, you should consult with your healthcare professional before making any dramatic changes in your diet or lifestyle plan or management of your medical conditions. But I will give a disclaimer to that disclaimer and say that your healthcare professional might not be up to date on the latest research about intermittent fasting. So maybe it would be good for you to share some of the resources and information with them if they're not familiar with it, because there may actually be some benefit for you. But I guess a short way to put it, I'm a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. So I want to start with a question. What is the number one killer of people? And so I don't know, I can see if anyone types any answers in the chat. I could see it, but I will just let it hang there for a little bit of suspense and then move on to answer this question, because the number one killer is, you guessed it, food. The number one killer of people, if you look at the root cause, is food. So in 2021, even in the throes of a pandemic, the top causes of death, heart disease, cancer, and COVID-19 were the top 3 causes of death in 2021. And really, even when we think about the pandemic, all 3 of these top 3 causes of death have strong links to food factors. We know that obesity was one of the leading risk factors that tripled your risk of dying, or I can't remember whether it was dying or being hospitalized, but it dramatically increased the risk that you were faced with if you contracted COVID-19, if you suffer from the medical condition of obesity. So, a little funny here. Now it's time for our News One special feature, Stuff Your Face, with local news reporter Max Moore. Today we visit Chunko's Diner, where you get more. And of course, more is the little grim reapers there of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and we could probably draw another one on here, unfortunately, with the pandemic that is slow to get out of here. So, just so that we can ease into the topic about humans, I thought it would be good to share something. I'm always on the lookout for information about intermittent fasting. I'll share my bias with you in a second about why that is. But a few years ago, I was doing a research project with my daughter about the monarch butterfly. And when you look at the monarch butterfly and how it migrates, every year they have 4 generations of monarch butterfly, and this last generation, the 4th generation, that is the generation that's going to have to make the 5,000-mile trip to a certain area in Mexico for the winter. And what we know about the monarch butterfly is that the average lifespan of the first 3 generations is about 2 to 6 weeks. But then this last generation, the generation that needs to make that 5,000-mile trip to the breeding grounds, well, there's spring breeding grounds, but make this overwintering area, the trip to the overwintering area, they have a lifespan of 9 months. That's like a ridiculous multiplication in lifespan of this butterfly. And it turns out that the reason this happens, or the way it happens, is because as the nectar from the various flowers starts to get more scarce, the survival genes in the monarch butterfly are turned on. And that allows this last generation of monarch butterfly to live 9 months when the previous 3 generations only lived 2 to 6 weeks. So here is where I share my bias, because I was raised in the Nation of Islam, and one of our dietary practices is to eat 1 meal a day. I don't know if you've ever seen this book, How to Eat to Live. Well, from a religious perspective, I followed this before I understood the science of why it works. But in the book, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad says if you eat 1 meal a day or 1 meal every other day, it will prolong your life. So, a lot of people might look at 1 meal a day as a diet for weight loss, but what in that book, what he said was it would prolong your life. He said you must not eat between meals. Try to eat at the same hour tomorrow as you eat today. And do not even drink juices, milk, soft drinks between meals. So what this is fasting every day. It's known as intermittent fasting in the scientific literature. And then recently, when I was refreshing for this presentation, I realized there's a lot of terms to get more specific about the type of fast that is even more detailed than that. But what we know is that when they've looked at this research, and they've been researching caloric restriction in the last 20 years, that has sort of that aging research has started to hone in on the fasting research, and the results are consistent. Whether you're talking about fruit flies or the monarch butterfly or mice or primates, when various methods of intermittent fasting are applied to these species, they all live longer. Now, I mentioned that to say that for human studies, there's not a specific study that has currently produced results showing that humans live longer when you eat this way. But we have looked at biomarkers of like blood work, basically things that are associated with living longer. Those things do seem to be consistent with what we would expect if we follow people for 70, 80. I mean, nowadays it's quite possible that people can live 120 years. Someone being born today could possibly live 120 years, or who knows if we have additional scientific advances beyond that, where that would be a pretty long study, and we haven't quite gotten there. But so far, every species it's been tested in, it works. We even started feeding our rabbit um, less. Rabbits will just eat all day long, and we let our rabbit fast so that he can live longer. We like Jasper. So this method, just getting into the science, caloric restrictive and intermittent fasting diets have been proven to prolong or expand the lifespan of a number of different species. And when we talk about caloric restriction, we're generally talking about cutting the calorie intake by about 30%, which is doable, but I will say is hard. So if the typical American diet is about 2,000 calories, to cut it 30% means you would need to cut 600 calories from that daily diet. So basically have about 1,400 calories a day. And I don't know about you guys, but I like to get full when I eat. And many people find it difficult to restrict their calories like that, down to 1,400 calories a day. But most of the benefits, really more benefits in terms of the research that's been done, has been not so much with just eating like a bird all day and having very little intake, but even if you kept that intake the same, but just limit when you're taking in the food to a certain number of hours a day, you can actually get all of those benefits and then some. And of course, with intermittent fasting, they have really, teased out a lot of different methods. What I described about eating one meal a day would be considered time restricted feeding. So now for us in the nation, that's been, usually that time is a pretty short window. Like it's supposed to be a 2-hour window between 4 and 6 p.m. that you're eating. Most people, they might start eating at 4, but not stop at a specific time. But that still would be an example of time restricted feeding. Or, as I mentioned before, the alternate day feeding where you eat every other day, or you have one meal every other day, that would be alternate day feeding. Although in the scientific literature, on those days when people are eating or the animals are eating, they're pretty much having whatever throughout the days that they are eating, and nothing on the days when they're not, but like a water or non-caloric beverage. There's periodic fasting. That's what Muslims all over the world are doing right now, where we have a 30-day period, 29 or 30-day period, where we're not having anything at all, not even water during the day. But really, since we are generally eating every day, that might be more closely referred to as an intermittent time restricted feeding, or ITRF. So there's so many different variations. There's 5 and 2 fasting, where you have 2 days where you fast or have very little calories, and 5 days where you just eat regular. But all of these different variations have been shown to provide benefits for humans and animals, including reversing the risk of diabetes or reversing diabetes altogether, improving high blood pressure, improving or reducing the risk of heart disease, or improving survival even if you suffer from something like a heart attack or stroke, for your brain and your heart to bounce back faster. If you had been following that diet before, it can reduce the risk of Alzheimer's, cancer, even depression. So these are a lot of benefits. There have been some human studies, not on lifespan so much, but on different factors that can relate to diseases that could curtail someone's life. And even when we think about something negative, like a person who didn't have access to good nutrition early in life, or for a number of different reasons, might have had a period where they were a female child that experienced caloric restriction early in life. It was associated with lower rates of invasive breast cancer. So women who had never had children had a 23% reduction in invasive breast cancer if they had experienced caloric restriction earlier in life. And we can all imagine reasons why that could be, some of which are not good, but this was a benefit that came out of it. But when women had children, this benefit was even greater, a 76% reduction in invasive breast cancer in women who had children and had experienced caloric restriction early in life. It was even found in another study, I kind of jumping down, that people who were being treated for cancer, because cancer cells really rely on glucose, and they use a lot of energy, they don't do so well. They actually, when you introduce chemotherapy treatments or even radiation treatments to a patient who is in a fasting state or otherwise in a ketogenic state where they are not using glucose directly for their energy source, the cancer responds better. So your chemotherapy will work better if you're in a fasting state. Of course, talk to your doctor about this before introducing this, or you can look at some of the studies and bring them to your doctor to see if this is something that might be an extra enhancement to the treatment that you're getting. But, just to dig in a little bit more about intermittent fasting, because caloric restriction, as I said, for me personally, that's a little bit difficult to have some, but only a little. It's sort of like an alcoholic where it's better to just not drink alcohol. And for almost all of us are sugaraholics because our history on this planet has been that we needed to find food sources and we needed to find glucose. And now we have too much of it. So we have to, for many of us, it's easier to just have none and then eat when it's time to eat than to just have a little bit. And as I said before, there's even more benefits that we're seeing when animals and people were followed and compare the caloric restriction versus same amount of calories, but do it on an intermittent fasting basis. The blood sugar regulation improves, so all of our pre-diabetics, something to consider. Brain cell resistance to injury. So I mentioned about how if you have a stroke, you might actually suffer less damage if you followed an intermittent fasting approach, even if you didn't cut your total calories. So here's a chart just comparing that, where the food intake, little or no change. With intermittent fasting, body weight may or may not change. If you're very overweight or obese and you start to follow an intermittent fasting pattern, many people will find they will lose weight, maybe even most. And there's certain groups or communities that have formed around intermittent fasting for weight loss. But even without weight loss, there are a lot of potential benefits to your health through intermittent fasting. Your blood glucose level, that was about the same, about a 30% decrease. The insulin level decreased similarly with both methods. And having a lower insulin level means that your body is not requiring you to pump out. It's not requiring your pancreas to pump out high levels of insulin as a result of insulin resistance. So that would mean your body is not as insulin resistant as it was before. And, your body, your heart, your brain, your body is more resistant to various types of injuries. And, this is a chart taken from a pretty old study, but as I mentioned, in the last 20 years, this research has exploded, and all of it some 80 different studies was compiled into what we call a review article in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is considered a very reputable journal, around Christmas time in 2019, where they outlined the effects of intermittent fasting on health, aging, and disease. And one of the authors, Mark Mattson, he's been, really one of the champions of the intermittent fasting movement, or really both. And he and his colleague, Dr. Rafael de Cabo, went through and reviewed 80 different studies showing that when you restrict the calories or cut them off, go into a fasting state, and it takes about 10 to 12 hours for your body to get into this state, it actually changes how your DNA is working, where it puts your body in fight mode. It starts to clear out anything that's not working properly. That's called autophagy, where your body is doing a spring cleaning internally. It improves your sugar regulation, increases stress resistance, even reduces inflammation. So many diseases that are inflammatory type diseases, like um, uh, rheumatologic diseases like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, and even, being in a metabolic, if you have that metabolic syndrome X, that's a state of inflammation where it can improve all of those things. So it's a pretty sciencey journal, and usually I like free journals. They made me pay for that one, but it was worth it. And you can find a lot of summaries of this science on TED Talks or YouTube, so you don't have to pay for this particular article unless it so interested you. But I went ahead and paid for it because I like to have my ammunition when I tell people have periods of time where you just don't eat. So what is happening with this? We know that your genes are, I guess think of it this way. Your genome is what's written in pen. So it's like the genes, the permanent structure of what makes you who you are. But there is something called the epigenome. And that has to do with how the genes are turned on and off. And they can be affected by different things in our environment, whether that's food, whether that is stress, psychological stress, different medications, pesticides or other toxins in the environment. They can actually affect what genes are turned on and off, and that's what we call epigenetic factors. So these things, they're not permanent changes, but they can be passed on a couple generations. In fact, it was shown that even people who had there was one study that looked at a generation of people where they had basically overabundance, and 3 generations into the future, you could actually see a difference in the lifespan of people who experience that. So these are things that can be passed down a couple of generations, but they're not necessarily permanent. They can be changed and reversed by reversing some of the factors. So that's why I'm trying to tell you guys about intermittent fasting, so we can start to reverse some of these things that might mean that, Black people are more at risk for diabetes or heart attack or stroke, or even death from COVID-19. We can begin to do different things with our diet and the timing of our diets, even if we don't change what we have, that could maybe pull some of this back. So this is just this slide is just talking about some human studies, if you're interested, if you don't believe if it was just in animals, where things that we know correspond to living longer, like lower body temperature, lower insulin levels, higher levels of DHEAS, which is a certain type of hormone. These are things that we know are related to living longer. And so when we do caloric restriction and intermittent fasting, all of those markers that we can measure without actually following someone for 100 years, they do make a big difference in those levels when you follow this dietary pattern. So try it, trust me. So this next slide, I wanted to give just like a common sense idea about how, even when you're talking about toxins in the body, right? If you go a long period of time without taking in any toxins, you give your body time to clear out the toxins. So all of us take in toxins, whether it's in the air, in the water that we drink, in the food that we eat. There's low levels of toxins in everything. And that's one of the things that I look forward to about the fast of Ramadan, because even though I generally do follow a 1 meal a day pattern, I will have water or something to drink, and even that can have poison in it. That is just from this is the world we're living in. There's toxins all around us. But this is just a diagram of like what happens if you take in a medicine or a toxin or anything like that. You have a period where when you first take it in, the concentration goes up to the maximum, and then with time, it kind of falls off. and it may remain at a low level for a long time, but in general, your body tries to do a pretty good job of clearing these things out. Now, if you kept dosing the toxin over and over and over again, then you actually would start to build up higher and higher levels in your body. So, like if we talk, for instance, about um, mercury in the fish, or different other kinds of heavy metal poisoning, or pesticide exposure. If you only had it every now and then, your body would have a better chance of clearing it out. But if you're constantly dosing yourself with the toxin, it makes it very hard to give your body time to really clear it all the way out. So we talk about this therapeutic window has to do with medicine. So that's where I'm drawing this analogy. But just think about how there's no therapeutic value for most of these toxins. But if you keep dosing it over and over again, you're going to build up a certain level in your body. But even when you do that, again, when you start fasting and then you just give it a break, you give your body, your liver, your kidneys, all of those things that allow your body time to get those concentrations of poisons down. So this is just some visual aids to help us understand how when you just cut it off, you have a chance to eliminate those toxins. This isn't even talking about the other metabolic benefits that lead to the turning on of survival genes so that we live longer. You can get toxins out of your body. So just transitioning from the science, and we will have time for questions. There might be people who have some questions about all of this sciencey stuff that I share, but basically the general point is take a break. Take a break from eating. We were told breakfast is the most important meal of the day, or you must eat 3 meals plus snacks, or 5 small meals a day. But we can consider incorporating intermittent fasting as a way that is supported by the current scientific research of improving our health. Of course, again, check with your healthcare professional, but they might not be aware of this latest research. So we might need you to help them out by bringing them some of the latest research so that they can better guide you about how to incorporate this potentially life-saving and life-prolonging method of eating to improve your health. You want to make a plan, and I'm going to give you some tips about how you can start to incorporate this. But don't try to go from you eat all day every day to you only eat from 4 to 6 p.m. every day, or you eat every other day, or one meal every 3 days. And I'm just going to be honest, my father, he was a Muslim minister, and he told me that what his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, told him is that the way Methuselah was able to live to almost 1,000 years is because he was fed once a week. And there are people who actually would do this, and still do, eat 1 day a week. I'm not telling you to eat 1 day a week, but if you just start by not eating all day long with snacks and all of that, and start to pull that in, you can experience some health benefits. Most likely, check with your doctor. So here's a method, and this is pretty closely aligned with that New England Journal article I told you about, of trying to encourage people to gradually incorporate this into their life. So for a month, you could start with making sure or planning a 10-hour window when you are going to take in calories. So 10 hours could be, just using this diagram, let's say you start taking in calories at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you stop taking in calories at 8 o'clock at night. So from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, that is when you take in calories. After 8 o'clock, you don't have anything else until 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, there are people who are going to be like, but I need my coffee in the morning. Okay, you can have coffee, but don't put cream in it. Don't put sugar in it, because then you're not fasting. Your body is not passing whole cheeseburgers through the bloodstream. All your body really knows is it glucose here, fat, protein, and it can sense when there are calories there that can be converted to energy. So 10-hour window, you can do that, and you don't even have to do it every day. You could try doing it for 5 days a week, just getting started. Do that for a month. Do a checking on your body. How's that working for you? Then maybe try doing that 7 days a week. Then when you feel like you are in a pretty good habit with it, you can narrow down. And most people stay in this range, is 16-8. 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of feeding. So with this, let's say starting at noon. But again, it could be starting at 10 o'clock and go to 6 p.m. Or you could start at noon and eat between noon and 8 p.m. And then the other time, starting at 8 p.m., you fast. You fast. You fast until the next day at noon. And then you eat and eat and eat until 8 p.m. and then you start all over again. So you can do that 5 days a week and see how you do. Maybe get some lab work. At that point, you'll be at the 3-month mark. You can maybe get your A1C checked if your doctor agrees, or take a look at what your blood pressure readings were when you first started and compare that to when you're 3 months in, or your average blood sugar readings if you are pre-diabetic or have diabetes, or even your weight, and see how that is working for you. And if everything is going well, you can keep going to follow that pattern for 7 days a week. And there are people who restrict more, as I said, generally, I try to keep that window narrow, down to 6 hours or 4 hours. If you are healthy enough to do that, or if you feel like it's a good balance for you. But this, you want to try to have at least a 10 to 12 hour fasting window in order to turn on all those survival genes. Okay, so most of us, while you're sleeping, you're not eating. There are people that have they sleepwalk and they go in the kitchen and they're eating in their sleep. But in general, if you get 8 hours of sleep, you're fasting for 8 hours already. So if you just prolong the time before you start taking in calories, or maybe start a little before you go to bed, that fasting, it really shouldn't be too much of a disruption to your life to start to incorporate this. And of course, I mentioned that there's a whole bunch of different variations on this theme. There's, skipping meals when you can. There's fasting for 2 days out of the week and eating regular the other days. There are people that do this for health. There are a lot of Muslims who do this as part of a traditional fast, the fast of David. We are taught that he fasted 2 days out of the week. And even Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, fasted 3 days out of the month, which is another thing that we do in the nation. But there's a lot of different variations, but however way fits your preference and your lifestyle and what you think you could stick to, because being consistent is one of the most important things. If you only do something here and there, you're not going to get the same benefits as if you can maintain it for months and years even, to really get those benefits on your long-term health. There's even helpful apps that are out now that I was able to find fasting for. Some of them are paid or might have upgrades where you have to pay, and all of it might not be necessary. But sometimes if you have a community, there's probably Facebook groups, intermittent fasting Facebook groups, and other communities. There are so many more resources now that people have started to catch on with the benefits of your that this can provide to your health, where it's easier to do it because there's many more people doing it with you. I remember being surprised. Now, I don't know about his foray into politics, but Herschel Walker is an athlete actually who has followed intermittent fasting in terms of eating 1 meal a day through his career. And, he actually is a pretty good example of what it looks like when someone has taken advantage of this health practice as far as his physical health. So in summary, we know that many people suffer from illnesses that really, if you track back to the root of it, they're food-related illnesses, whether that's diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and even severe consequences of COVID-19. And we also have scientific research that has really retired this idea that you've got to have 3 meals plus snacks. although there might be some people who benefit from that on a short-term basis for their weight loss plan, because that was something else I meant to mention, that people get concerned that if you fast, you're going to slow down your metabolism. And that's a real concern, because that's exactly what it does, which is why it helps you to live longer. So yes, speeding up your metabolism, if you wanted some short-term results in terms of weight loss, it might be better to eat in a way that really revs up your metabolism. But if you're really looking for the long term and wanting to preserve your health and preserve your life, then maybe once you get the benefits you need from that weight loss plan, you can consider transitioning to a more intermittent fasting regimen. It's not used enough. We don't really encourage people to do it enough in the medical field. We tend to over rely on our medication tools and under rely on dietary tools, in part because it takes time to really teach people and coach people about that. So I even myself, I know this is important. I might not spend enough time on it because we're really rushed. The system really condenses a lot of things that we're trying to do in a typical doctor's visit, where we might not focus as much on this, but it's inexpensive. Most people, most of my patients, they don't really want to take medicine for their conditions, and this is something that if you did it and did it well, it might help. We have solid scientific research, and there's a number of different variations of how you can do it and still get a benefit. So that is what I wanted to share. If you want more information about my practice, you can go to fountainmedonline.com. I have started to shift my practice to what is called hybrid DPC, or direct primary care, where commercial insurances, I'm not taking any new patients, but if you are serious about your health and want to get an affordable way of paying a yearly fee or monthly fee, then we could do it that way. So you can reach me that way. I actually do see a number of questions. I can try to go in order. I'll go down to the bottom. A question is it hard to exercise and still fast? Will I be tired? You might be, and it can take time for your body to adjust. You will be especially struggling if you're not able to hydrate, but you could make your exercise time when you are in a fed state. So you could exercise during that 10-hour, 8-hour, 6-hour window when you are able to take in some nutrition, if that's better for you. But I was actually listening to a lecture that included one of the researchers, Mark Matson, where you can kickstart your body going into that survival state if you are fasting and you exercise while fasting. So you might not be ready for that right out the gate, but there are some potential benefits. I would definitely make sure I'm hydrating, and maybe you could make that exercise period be close to the time when you are going to start to have some food, or right after the time when you had some food. Let's see, that was the same question. Will I lose muscle if I fast? Some of this has to do with what foods you have, but you can maintain muscle mass while fasting. I mentioned Herschel Walker. He everybody gets a little older, but yes, you can definitely maintain muscle mass while you fast. When you fast, see, when you're taking a lot of glucose at one time, your body prefers to use glucose, right? And when your body is trained to store that glucose so that it can still make it, and your brain will have something to use if you have periods of time when you don't have access to glucose, which, living in America especially, we have access to glucose all day long. But that's what fat is. Fat is all of that extra sugar that your body couldn't use it all at one time, and it stored it. In order for your body to go and use the storage, which is fat, it's not going to burn protein first. It's going to burn first your liver can kind of store sugar, or a chemical that can be converted to sugar very easily. But once that is used up, which is after about 10 hours, then it's going to go to that fat and burn the fat. So you don't really need to worry about losing muscle if you are having a well-balanced meal. When you do eat, you should be able to maintain muscle, but you won't ever get to burning the fat if you're constantly giving your body an easier source of sugar, which is just sugar, eating the carbs. So fasting, or even fast mimicking diets, and I don't have time to get into that, where you basically can have your body thinking that it's fasting because it's no easy glucose for it to access. But no, you should burn that fat, which is sugar that your body stored for hard times, which is what your body senses when you're fasting. And then let's see, the last question that I see here is, do insurances normally pay for lab tests for pre and post diet changes when a doctor writes the order for it? You know, this is one of the reasons why I have decided to incorporate direct primary care into my practice, because who knows what the insurance company is going to pay for. They should. Typically, Medicare is especially tricky though, because they have like very solid, strict rules about what tests they're going to pay for and when, and what diagnoses are associated. But typically insurance, like a Medicaid or even commercial insurances don't typically give a lot of pushback, but you have to understand your insurance. You might have a deductible where your insurance isn't going to cover anything until the deductible is met. But, you can actually have arrangements directly with the lab where the test might really only be $8 or $10 or something less than that. And if you paid directly for the test and didn't use your insurance, it will probably be dirt cheap. But you might want to figure that out with your health insurance first. I know in my world, we provide the service and hope we're going to get paid later. So I don't want to make any promises about what your insurance is and is not going to cover. Typically, commercial insurance or Medicaid, yes. Medicare, it's more iffy. Whether you have a deductible, again, it gets questionable. So you've got to really be sure about your insurance plan. But like a basic metabolic panel, that should really only be about $8. A hemoglobin A1C, you might get that for as low as $15, but certainly no more than $30 something. A cholesterol profile, again, is pretty inexpensive. So you can ask your doctor if they have an arrangement with the lab where you can know exactly what you're going to be charged. Pay, typically, I know with my practice, the lab, we have an arrangement where our fees are going to be the lowest that you can get. So we might collect from you the $30 or $50 for the set of tests, and then we pay the lab directly, and that is going to be much less expensive for some people. So there's a number of different ways to handle it, but don't get me to lie and talk about what your insurance is and isn't going to do. So I think that covered all of the questions. Again, these terms, if you Google intermittent fasting, or you go on YouTube, intermittent fasting, or you go look for a TED Talk about intermittent fasting or diet and aging, you can find a wealth of information, some of which might be presented in a prettier way, not my face of course, but with nice diagrams that were even more engaging, and little animations and things like that. There's a whole world of information out there, and I hope that more people take advantage of this life-saving method that is completely free and could save your life.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabazz, for all of that information. As I said at the top of the hour, we are recording all of today's sessions, so feel free to check back with us later on this week, and you can actually rewatch this session on demand, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel within the next week. And if you would like to reach out to the fine doctor here, please be sure to pop over to the speaker section, and you can click on her profile and obtain all of her contact information. If you have any other questions, I'm sure she can, you can shoot her an email. Maybe we're going to change docs. But at any rate, thank you again for your time and expertise. As always, thank you so much for your support of the conference. And that concludes our sessions for the day. But don't leave quite yet. We still have our comedy show, which is coming up in a second, in about 2 minutes. Okay. So stick around.
Laughter is medicine too. So
that's
all
right.
this
Laughter is
medicine.
So be sure to drop over in a couple of minutes, and we should be live. Thank you all, and you have a good afternoon, Dr. Shabazz. See you soon.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.